So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad-gita, chapter 6, entitled Dhyan Yoga, text number 4. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yada hi nendriyarteshu Yada hi nendriyarteshu Na karmas vasu sajjate Na karmas vanusajjate Sarva sankalpa sannyasi Sarva sankalpa sannyasi Yoga rudhastadochyate Yoga rudhastadochyate Yadahi nindriyardashu Nama kamas vasajjate Sarva sankalpa sannyasi Yoga rudhastadochyate Nadahi nendriyarteshu Na karma vanusajjate Sarva sankalpa sannyasi Yoga rudhastadochyate Yada hi nendriyateshu
Na karmasvanusajjate
Na karmasvanusajjate
Sarva sankalpa sannyasi
Sarva sankalpa sannyasi
Yoga rudhastadochyate
Yoga rudhastadochyate Yada hi nendriyarteshu Na karmasvanusajjate Sarva sankalpa sannyasi Yoga rudhastadochyate Yada, when, he, certainly, na, not, indriya arteshu, in sense gratification, na, never, karmashu, in fruitive activities, anusajjate, one necessarily engages, Sarva sankalpa, all material desires. Sannyasi, renouncer. Yoga arudhaha, elevated in yoga. Tada, at that time. Uchyate is said to be. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when having renounced all material desires. He neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Purport: when a person is fully engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, he is pleased in himself, and thus he is no longer engaged in sense gratification or in fruitive activities. Otherwise, one must be engaged in sense gratification, since one cannot live without engagement. Without Krishna consciousness, one must always seeking self-centered or extended selfish activities. But a Krishna-conscious person can do everything for the satisfaction of Krishna, and thereby he directly detached from sense gratification. One who has no such realization must mechanically try to escape material desires before being elevated to the top rung of the yoga ladder. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Langum Langayate Ganim Yat Kripa Tadaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Paramanandamadavam Shri Chaitanyeshwaram Yadahi Nendriyarteshu Na Karmas Vanusajjate Sarva Sankalpa Sannyasi Yoga Rudha Tadochyate. So, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that if you don't engage the senses in the in the spiritual activities, then you'll have to engage the senses in material activities, because there must be engagement for the senses. We have this material body, and the material body has senses: eyes, nose, tongue, ear, sense of touch, genital, etc. Senses. So the senses require real engagement. So Krishna is explaining that someone in yoga, they engage their senses in the service of the Supreme. Now, how do they do that? Well, in Arjuna's case, his particular occupation was as a Kshatriya. Arjuna is Kshatriya, military man. So Arjuna was thinking not to fight, but his reasons for not fighting were based on sense gratification. If I fight and I kill my grandfather or my cousins, even if I win the kingdom, who will I enjoy the kingdom with? He was thinking, right? So that means when he's thinking of who will I enjoy with, means he's thinking of sense gratification. So Krishna is telling him to fight, not on the basis, telling him to do his duty, and ultimately do your duty for the satisfaction of Krishna. It's not that we can just continually act on the platform of selfish sense gratification, whether it's self or extended sense gratification. Extended self-sense gratification means what's in it for my senses, what I can see, what I can taste, what I can experience with my mind. An extended sense gratification means my family members, my society, right? So this type of engagement of the senses and the mind simply brings about frustration. But the same senses and mind engaged in the service of the Supreme, Krishna, brings about peace, tranquility, and satisfaction. So the yoga practice means to control the mind, to bring the mind under control. For so many lifetimes, in so many different bodies, the mind has been in control. Actually, we have a particular body due to the mind. We don't really work with our body. Prabhupada explains in the introduction of the Bhagavad-gita, we work with our mind. We think to do something. First we think to do something, and then the body carries out the action. So it's really the mind with which we are working. Now when the mind is not controlled, then we're working for our sense gratification. Whatever it is, it's for sense gratification. And Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that we need to bring the mind under control. Controlled mind means that the mind is thinking how to satisfy the senses of Krishna. The Supreme Lord has senses, but not material senses. The Lord's seeing, the Lord's hearing, the Lord's tasting are spiritual. But in the conditioned state, we can't understand that. We don't know that. So we have to purify the mind. The mind has to come under control. And the mind under control is done by the practice of yoga, right? And that highest form of yoga is to fix the mind on the Supreme Lord Krishna. And that has become, in this age of Kali, a special concession for people in the Kali Yuga to control their minds by chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. Now read the next verse. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. Purport. The word Atma denotes body, mind, and soul, depending upon different circumstances. In the yoga system, the mind and the conditioned soul are especially important, since the mind is the central point of yoga practice. Atma refers here to the mind. The purpose of the yoga system is to control the mind and to draw it away from attachment to sense objects. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the mire of nescience. In material existence, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved with the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. Therefore, the mind should be trained so that it will not be attracted by the glitter of the material nature. And in this way, the conditioned soul may be saved. One should not degrade oneself by attraction to sense objects. The more one is attracted by sense object, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. The best way to disentangle oneself is always engage the mind in Krishna consciousness. The word he is used for emphasizing this point, that one must do this. It is also said, Mana eva manusyanam karanam bandha mokshayo bandhaya vishay asango muktay nirvishayam manaha. For man, mind is the cause of bondage, and mind is the cause of liberation. Mind absorbed in sense objects is the cause of bondage, and mind detached from the sense objects is the cause of liberation. Amrita Bindu Upanishad. Therefore, the mind which is always engaged in Krishna consciousness is the cause of supreme liberation. So again, Krishna is explaining here what's the difference between a person beginning yoga and person advanced in yoga. The person that is in the neophyte stage, their mind is uncontrolled. Right? They follow the dictates of the mind. Go here, see this, taste that. Right? The people are walking down the street and they think, okay, let me go into the restaurant and eat something. They see a sign, family restaurant. So they're following the dictates of the mind. But a yogi controls the senses. So how does he control the senses? He doesn't control the senses by not eating, but he controls the senses by having the determination to only eat food that is offered to Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita that those who prepare food for their personal sense gratification, they're only eating sin. Right? Food is meant to be offered to the Supreme Lord first. Right? Just like a servant in the house, right? He's cooking for the master. Right? Cooking for the master. So his duty is to acknowledge that the master is the owner of everything by bringing the food, whatever he's cooking, first to the owner of the house. Isn't it? Right? If I all of a sudden, I'm cook, I'm cooking for the master and I eat everything first, is that proper? Huh? It's not proper. So we control the mind by acknowledging who is in control. Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita, Mayad yakshena prakriti suyate sacharachanam. This material nature is working under my direction. Right? So when we take the ingredients and we cook it, not with the idea that I'm going to offer this for the pleasure of the Lord, and then I take, after offering to the Lord, His prasadam, then the mind becomes controlled. Otherwise, the mind is out of control. This is possible with whatever we eat, the work that we do, whatever we do it as an offering to the Supreme Lord. Arjuna finally agreed to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra, not to win a kingdom, He fought to please Krishna. That was his reason for fighting. So, mind control is very important. But how to control the mind? The mind has got us in so many different situations by the mind, right? One person is thinking, I'll buy a car. Okay, so many people think, every day we see new cars on the street. Somebody's thinking, I'll buy a car. Right? So their mind tells them this kind, that kind. Right? Somebody wants to buy a Maruti something, and somebody else wants to buy a BMW. Okay? So the person that wants to buy the BMW has to shell out more money, so much money, right? He may not have the money. He may be working for the government. And he may think, but I want a BMW. So, for the government, there's some contract, and I'll cheat on that contract and make more money and buy the BMW. Now, you can get to you wherever you want to go in a Suzuki. You can get where you need to go in a Suzuki. You don't need a BMW, but the mind is telling him BMW. So he cheats on the contract. The enforcement directorate finds out, and he lands up in jail. Only by the mind. So that's why Krishna says, control the mind. Bring the mind under control. Do what you have to do for the pleasure of Krishna. Everybody has some duty, whether it's raising a family or studies or whatever. But do those things for the pleasure of Krishna. So one might say, well, how do I raise a family for the pleasure of Krishna? No. It's my family, my kids, my wife. But a devotee thinks differently. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions that he also had a family, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one of our acharyas, right? How many children did Bhaktivinoda Thakur had? 12 kids. It's a lot of kids, right? But he's thinking, my dear Lord, this is not my family. These are all your family. And isn't it so? Every living entity, where do they come from? They come from the Supreme Father, Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita, Aham bija pradapita. I'm the seed-giving Father. So I'm thinking I'm Father, but I'm not the Father. Ultimate Father is Krishna. Krishna is the Supreme Father. So therefore I should see everyone equally. All living entities belong to Krishna. I may have children, but ultimately they belong to Krishna. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is thinking, my dear Lord, I am your servant. This family is also yours. This family belongs to you, and I'm simply your manager here. Manager. Right? In this way, the mind becomes controlled. But in order to control the mind, we need to have proper training. There's no training how to control the mind. People get a PhD, MBA, so many different degrees. But none of those courses in MBA or PhD is how to control the mind. So although we may be very educated, if you can't control your mind, you're nothing but an educated fool. Because the mind will take you in the wrong direction. Isn't it? That's why there's so many young people, they're taking drugs. Is it not? The mind taking them in the wrong direction. They may be in college, they may be doing this, they may be doing that. Well, what is the use if they become addicted to brown sugar or something like that? What is the use? So, there needs to be a program for training the mind, to bring the mind under control. And that's this Krishna consciousness movement, to show everyone how to control the mind. Mind is the energy of Krishna. Just like this desk. What's a desk made out of? The Panch Mahabhut. Earth, water, fire, air. It's in this desk. Okay? So these different elements, they belong to God. They're His energies. But like us, living entities, besides Panch Mahabhut, this material body, we also have mind, intelligence, and ego. And that's called Sukshma Sharira, the subtle body. Subtle body. Right? So the mind is very powerful energy of Krishna. Very powerful. Right? As I said, it can make us go in the wrong direction, or it can take us in the right direction. What is the business of the mind? Only two things. The mind only does two things. You know, like in computer coding, there's a 0 and there's a 1. 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. And so many things are developed by 0, 2, binary coding. So the mind is the same. Sankalpa, vikalpa. Accepting, rejecting. Sankalpa, vikalpa. That's all the mind does. See some lady and the mind immediately, oh, so attractive. Or, Hare, achane dekhte hain. It's the mind's business. Yes, no, good, bad. So, the yogi is one who can engage the mind and not be engaged by the mind. So how to control the mind? That's the purpose of yoga. It's not to lose your body fat. That's not for yoga. It's not to help you control your diabetes. That's not the purpose of yoga. It's to help you control your mind. That's the purpose of yoga. So that we don't become degraded by the mind, but we become elevated, right? And that elevation can only happen when we engage the mind in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. And that begins by chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. Controlling the mind is not a mechanical thing. It's the energy of Krishna, very powerful energy. The mind can do so many things. Like right now, I can be sitting in Bombay in this class, and within a second, I can be in New York City by the mind. Right? Nighttime, we're sleeping. Right? But the mind is still working. Right? Mind is still working even while you're sleeping. So many dreams are coming and going. So controlling the mind, Arjuna, he's listening to this 6th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, and after the 6th chapter is over, what does he say to Krishna? He said, my dear Lord, it seems very difficult to control the mind, like trying to control the wind. And that's Arjuna, the personal friend of Krishna. What to speak of us? How to control the mind. But it's possible. Krishna says it's difficult, but it's possible by practice and detachment. So what's that practice? The practice is to chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare. And what is the detachment? No eating meat, fish, or eggs, no gambling, no intoxication, no sex outside of marriage. These are the 4 prohibitions. If one can follow these things and chant the holy name of Krishna, then one can very easily control the mind. Very simple. Follow the 4 rules. They're called the principles of freedom. Why? Because if you break the principles of freedom, then we are bound to take birth again in this material world. In the material world. What's the problem with being in the material world, you might ask? Right? So think about it. Does anybody here, the people sitting in the back, can you hear me back there? Okay. If you want to die, raise your hand. Hare? Kisi ka hath nahi utaya? You didn't raise your hand? You don't want to die. That means you don't want to die, right? Well, I got news for you. You're forced to die. No choice. What is the death rate? 100%. Everybody. Nobody wants to die. Nobody raised their hand. Right? But guess what? Everybody's going to die. Okay, how many of you back there want to get cancer? Raise your hand. Nobody wants cancer? Of course nobody wants cancer. But still we get sick, even though we don't want. So that's the problem with this material world. Janma, mrityu, jara bhyadhi, doka dushana darshanam. This is the problem. There's so many government agencies, so many institutions for education. But can one of these institutions stop death? Now the government is saying vote. Vote for Congress, vote for BJP, vote, vote, vote. But you ask them, okay, I'll give you my vote, but can you stop my death? Will they be able to say yes? They may say yes, 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 just to get your vote, but kitna jhoot bol sakte hain? Bataiye. So this is the problem in life. And to solve the problem, to solve this problem begins by yoga practice and bhakti yoga practice. And that begins by chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare. Then it'll be possible to control the mind. And if we can control the mind, Krishna clearly says that if you think of me at the time of death, then you don't come back to this material world. No more birth, no more death, no more old age, no more disease. So what does it take? We're spending so much time every day worrying about our families and our business and our job, going in the train, taking the bus, but we don't spend even a moment on our next life. No investment. All investment is in this life. But what about investing something in your next life? And what can we invest? A little bit of time, a little bit of time to chant Hare Krishna. Is that such a big investment? Is that such an impossible thing? You can do it. Take some time, chant the holy name of Krishna, and very quickly you will see that you're able to follow the four principles. By the power of the Supreme Lord, the Lord is He controls your mind. He's the supreme controller. Krishna Parameshwar. You may control something, your family, your society, your business, but Krishna's controlling everything. Ishvara Parama Krishna. He's Satchit Ananda. We're also Satchit Ananda. But we're stuck in this asat body, which is full of problems, and no Ananda. If we want to realize our real position of Satchit Ananda, then we have to take to this process of yoga, and the process is Bhakti Yoga, and it's very simple. Srila Prabhupada started this International Society for Krishna Consciousness so that everyone can learn the process of yoga, Bhakti Yoga, so that they can make a solution to the problems of this life, which means birth, death, old age, and disease. To finish it, very easily we can do it. Therefore, every evening we're having classes in the Bhagavad-gita, specifically for this purpose, to teach people how to become successful in this human form of life. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions? Yes.
You talked about the 4 principles that we should not break in life. So, what about unconsciously if we have done it in the past? And now, if we follow Bhagavad-gita and everything, so
Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita that you may, due to bad habits, due to wrong practices, you may not be able to follow, right? So Krishna takes that into consideration. But don't make a habit. When you should have a determination to follow these principles. Not like some religions, they sin all week and they go to the church on Sunday and they say, I did this and I did that. And Monday they're back out there again. No, not like that. By chanting the holy name of Krishna, you can become free from more sins than you can commit. You'll become free. But you have to have the determination not to do those sins again. Don't make chanting the holy name one business, right? You make sins, you chant the name, you're free from sins, more chanting, more try to become, that's an offense to the holy name. The holy name will free us from all our sins, but our determination must be not to commit the sins again.
So there's one last question I would like to ask. In all of Bhagavad Gita, it is said that whatever karma you do, you give it to me. You know, like...
Not give it, you don't give your karma to Krishna. What you do, karma means performing activities.
Okay.
That you do those activities in relationship to Krishna. Again, like cooking. You cook things for the pleasure of Krishna, you offer it to Krishna, and after it's offered to Krishna, you take Krishna's prasadam. So in this, it becomes a transcendental, divyam, transcendental activity.
How about salary? Suppose we are drawing salary, money. We are drawing a salary from the company. So again, we have to do the same thing, give the money there.
See, you're drawing a salary. When you spend that salary for sabji and atta and rice and dal, and you make it, you cook it, and then you offer it to Krishna, that's the perfection of your salary. And it's so nice that once you offer the food to Krishna, you get the prasadam. You're not the loser. Rather, you're the gainer. Whoever does things for Krishna, they are benefited. Krishna doesn't need our things. Krishna doesn't need anything from us. He's Atmarama, self-satisfied. But if we do things out of love for Krishna, He'll accept that. Just like a small child. A small child can bring his father's chapel, right? The father doesn't need the child to bring the chapel, right? But when the chapel is brought by the child to the father out of love, then the father becomes pleased, isn't it? Huh? Same way, when we try to do things for the pleasure of Krishna, then without any expectation in return, don't try to make Krishna your order supplier. Okay, I put 10 rupees in the hundi, now you give me, I should pass the test, or my business should... Why? Don't make business with Krishna, right? Do things for Krishna without any expectation, only just to please Krishna. That's all. Then very quickly, we'll become free from this cycle of birth and death, old age and disease. Hare Krishna. Any other questions?
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, as you mentioned that by controlling our senses, that is important because by putting our control on the senses, we can put ourselves to the Krishna consciousness. So as you mentioned that yoga is important. By keeping yoga practices, we can control our senses. So what are the method of the yogas so that we can control our senses in a better way.
The method of yoga to control your senses is to engage the senses in Krishna's service. We want to hear something, so we can hear the kirtan in the temple. We want to taste something, so we can eat Krishna prasadam. We want to speak something, so we speak about Krishna from Bhagavad-gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. We want to see something, so we see the deity in the temple nicely dressed. We hear the message from Bhagavad-gita and from Srimad Bhagavatam. In this way, we engage all the senses in the service of Krishna. And that's yoga. If we always engage our senses in the service of Krishna, then the senses cannot take us away from the spiritual path. Just like a snake is poison, but the poison is in the snake's teeth, right? So if you break the teeth of the serpent, he can't bite you. In the same way, if we control the senses by engaging the senses in the service of Krishna, then our senses cannot disturb us. Our senses become rather a means to obtain Krishna's service.
But our senses force are very strong. Once
Yes.
we attach ourselves to the Krishna consciousness, like everything, but we cannot fully confirm that each and every time our all senses will be set up to the Krishna consciousness. There are many things, many times when we get detached from that, and our senses also get very strong most of the time. So how do we control, especially those particular time, so that we can ensure that yes, our senses are always there with the Krishna.
The senses are the energy of Krishna. These senses are Krishna's energy. So the urge to enjoy the senses is strong, but Krishna is Rishikesh, the master of the senses. Rishikesha. He's the master of the senses. So when we engage the senses in the service of Rishikesh, then we become the master of the senses. Instead of becoming the servant of our senses, by the mercy of Rishikesh, we become the master of the senses. Goswami, instead of Godas. Now we're Godas. Whatever the senses say, I do. Eat this, hear that, go here, go to the movies, hear the cinema song, so many things. But as soon as I try to engage my senses to hear the kirtan, eat prasadam, go to the temple, then the master of the senses, Rishikesh, he allows the senses to come under our control.
Last question. So is that any permanent state when we clearly confine that yes, all the senses will always be there for the Krishna consciousness? Whether that particular state we can achieve in this life?
Yes, gradually the senses will come under control, gradually. As you perform devotional service and you associate with the devotees, then you can gradually control your senses. But if you don't have association, if you don't practice this bhakti yoga, then it's not possible. Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Srimad Bhagavad-gita ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.